Real estate investment, property rights and limitations. Get ready because it's time to raise the stakes with real estate. Like with any other specialized area, real estate has its own specialized terms and definitions, which we need to understand in order to communicate properly within the field. We'll be continuing on learning some specialized terms and definitions here, referencing Investopedia, which is a place you can go to look up terms and definitions that are investment related, getting more detail on them. The terms that we're looking at here are going to be terms that are going to be related to restrictions we would have on the property. So in other words, if we own real estate, the general idea is that we can do what we want with the property that we own unless there's some type of government restriction stopping us from doing something on the property. Now note that these restrictions can kind of go both ways in terms of are they beneficial or harmful to us. When we first hear them, we think, hey, the restrictions are bad because you're restricting me from doing something with my property, which is true if it's going to be a restriction from what you want to do. So if I wanted to build up on my property, for example, and they put some kind of restriction that I can't build above a certain level, then, and I want to do that, that would be a restriction for us. However, they can also be kind of beneficial to the value of the property if they're restrictions on other people, meaning, for example, if I've already built my home and I'm happy with it, and then there's a restriction on other people building up higher or a restriction on other people building at all, that then restricts the supply of the property around the area, and it could actually lead to an increase in the value of the property. So in that case, if you're the homeowner, it's kind of like you climbed up the pole already, and then you greased the pole so no one else can climb up on it through zoning restrictions, right? So there could be kind of a double-edged sword on the zoning restrictions as to whether or not they'd be bad for a particular homeowner in a particular area or good to a particular homeowner, or how they would feel good or bad to someone else that's trying to get into the market in that particular area. So keeping that in mind, first we'll be taking a look at zoning. So zoning, municipal or local laws or regulations that govern how real property can and cannot be used in certain geographic areas. So they're going to be mapping out the geographic area. They're going to put some regulations in terms of what you can and cannot do within that mapped out area. So for example, zoning laws can limit commercial or industrial use of land to prevent oil, manufacturing, or other types of businesses from building in residential neighborhoods. So note, obviously, when you're thinking about purchasing property, you got to make sure that what you want to do with the property will be permitted within the laws that are going to be taking place, and you might also have to predict what you think is going to happen, in the future with regards to the zoning type laws as well. Now, obviously, when you think about these types of restrictions, when you have a residential property, no one really likes someone to move in, like an oil manufacturing next to you or any industrial business right next door or something like that. So you can think about, obviously, the people that already own the buildings or residential areas then would have an incentive to restrict business, especially manufacturing business, that would be built next door to them, because that would be beneficial, you would think, to their property value once they're there. So again, you can kind of see the pros and cons that would be with these kind of zoning laws and the incentives people would have, whether they're trying to go in or move into a community, or whether they're already living in a community, how they might, view these kind of zoning laws. So zoning laws can be modified or suspended if the construction of a property will serve to help the community advance economically. The zoning allows local governments to regulate which areas under their jurisdictions may have real estate or land used for particular purposes. So they're going to basically restrict how the land or the building would be used. Examples of zoning classifications include residential, commercial, agricultural, industrial, or hotel hospitality, as well as other more specific designations. So we can imagine basically mapping out here, having these classifications about basically the zoning rules in those categories: residential, commercial, agricultural, industrial, hotel, hospitality, and possibly more specific in certain circumstances. They can be changed by a local government as long as they fall within the state and federal statutes. So obviously, this is something that can change. You can change the zoning, but then it would be a government kind of process in order to do so. A particular plot of land can be rezoned based on consideration. So how zoning works. Zoning outlines what type of development and operational use of land is allowed on a given tract. Municipalities generally partition districts, neighborhoods according to a master plan, and then it may be done promote economic development, control the flow of traffic, manage noise levels, reserve living space for residents, and protect certain resources. So again, why might these be done? You can see how, they basically map these things out. They're basically going to say this is what is allowed in particular areas. Why might that be done? It's important to kind of understand why these things could be done. Again, from someone who's going to move into the area, if you're trying to purchase within the area, what's going to be your reason for purchasing it in the area? And then also have the perspective of someone that already lives in the area, what might be their perspective in terms of those the zoning laws and what they would want to go for as you think of zoning as a government thing, which is going to be done by elections and whatnot. So it may be done to promote economic development. So obviously that people that are in the particular area may be happy for certain types of economic development and may not like some other type of business development, right? If you actually live in the area, control the flow of traffic. So obviously if you're living in an area, you want the traffic to flow, but you don't want the freeway, right next to you or something like that. And so you can see where the incentives would be for people that are involved in the decision-making process for a government kind of action. Manage noise levels. So again, you could see where that would be in terms of if you already live in a neighborhood versus if you're moving into a neighborhood versus, if you're a type of business that's moving into the neighborhood, what your incentives might be for these different things. Reserve living space for residents and protect certain resources. Now, this last one is obviously one, protect certain resources. That's the classical example of once you already have a home and you're living in the home, you've already climbed up the pole and then you grease the pole, right? You say, hey, if you build any more houses around here, then you're gonna endanger an endangered butterfly or something like that, and that could restrict the building around you, which obviously increases the property value of the people that already have built in the area. So you can see how these laws have an impact on the property value. The more restrictions to building, actually the higher and more inflated the prices of the homes will generally be. So how zoning works, local government could ban the use of residential property for business purposes to keep commercial activity confined to specific parts of town. Zoning can lead to conflicts if residents dispute the designated usage. Zoning laws can also regulate the details of construction in specific neighborhoods. For example, zoning can limit the maximum height of buildings in a given area regardless of the type of construction allowed. So the height is another area that is often under controversy, because there's often view kind of controversies, meaning if you have a house on a hill and you have a nice view of a landscape or a view of the beach, and then someone right underneath you of the hill builds a house that's higher, and then it will get in the way of your view to some extent, then you can see again where the incentives happen with the zoning laws to try to restrict people from building up in those instances as well. And, restricting people from building up, for example, there's many places that say, they've restricted building up. And if you can't build up, meaning you can't build living facilities for as many people, because you're restricted, you only have so much space. At some point, you start building up. And so that, again, is another way that can restrict the amount of people that would be in a particular area, and it would probably lead to increasing the prices of the residents that are already in the area. So high-rise residents or offices may be banned on particular parcels through zoning regardless of whether the building otherwise comply with the laws. So how zoning works continued. Zoning restrictions will generally influence prices when purchasing a piece of property. So again, you got to kind of have an idea of what the zoning restrictions are and what might be the zoning restrictions going forward, because they're one of a really big factor in the long term as to what the property value is going to do Is the property value going to go up or down? And it's kind of a funny thing that the more restrictions there are for other people, again, it's kind of like greasing the pole once you've already climbed up it, that would mean that the housing prices would probably go up. And you can see this if you look at the expensive areas on the maps for homes. You could see it's probably highly correlated and completely related to how many zoning restrictions they've put in place as well. So real estate might sell at a premium based on how many limits were put in a place by the municipality. So then we have the eminent domain. So eminent domain is the next thing, where it's just a government imposed kind of thing that can impinge on your property rights. Because once again, you would think that the general idea, if it's your property, you can do in essence what you want to do, as long as you're not disturbing other people in their ability to do what they want to do, unless there's going to be restrictions. And eminent domain is the other big one that there's a lot of dispute about. So the right of government, like the United States, to usurp private property for public use following fair compensation. So in other words, they say, hey, we're coming in, we're taking your property. And you say, hey, this is my property. I have to right the property. That's one of the rights I have, right? And they say, no, not in this instant, because we have eminent domain in this certain situation. So it's a very touchy thing in terms of individual rights in the United States. The idea is, how much, what right do they have to take your property, and what would be considered fair compensation. And basically, if eminent domain comes in and they declare that they're going to take your property, then there's situations where the property value actually goes down, of course, because everybody knows that the government wants to move in and take their property. And by the time they actually do it, the housing market price is obviously way down, because everybody knows that they've declared it to be a property that's going to be taken over and whatnot. And then so that by the time they get paid out, the property level could be lower. So there's a lot of interesting issues with regards to property rights and eminent domain. But obviously, if it's an area that is in danger of being declared eminent domain, and then you got to be aware of that, of course. All things from aerospace, land, and contract rights to intellectual property is subject to eminent domain if a case can be made for its public use. So the idea being, if the public will benefit, the public is going to benefit from the eminent domain over and above the benefit of this one individual, and we can't, sacrifice the public good for this one piece of property, and therefore the government's going to do what they want to do. The classical example would be like, we're building a freeway through here or something like that, which is a public good that's going to be benefiting everyone. Or the classic example was a train, and the train's going through and whatnot. And we're trying to reel the track here, and you got, it's got to go where it's got to go. But now they've kind of increased it to other types of things, actually increasing it and then giving rights to private entrepreneurs or private construction and whatnot in areas, which becomes more controversial. So the legal debate surrounding unfair invoking of eminent domain, like when property owners are not fairly compensated, is called inverse condemnation. Eminent domain is a right granted under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. Similar powers can be found in most common law nations under different names. So in the United States, you have eminent domain. It's a similar kind of concept in other areas as well. It might be under different names. Private property is taken through condemnation proceedings. Owners can challenge the legality of the seizure and settle the matter of fair market value used for compensation. So you can obviously try to argue the legality of the seizure, that it's done in accordance with the law. And then you can argue, of course, whether the compensation is appropriate as well. The most straightforward example of condemnation involve land and buildings seized to make way for public project. So if you have a public project like a freeway, like a train, that would be the most common kind of example, the most clear-cut example. They're saying, hey, look, we've got to put this train, needs to be connecting the entire United States or so on. So, it's for the public good to put it through this particular area. It may include aerospace, water, dirt, timber, and rock appropriation from private land for the construction of roads. Eminent domain can include leases, stocks, and investment funds.